Let's go.
Okay. Hooray.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Kristina Panos.
This is episode 214, a jet engine hairdryer, Comic Sans type balls, and belief in graphene. This week in Hackaday news, we started up a new contest. This is the Op Amp contest, and this is the chance for all of you people who like playing around with the analog side of electronics to, I don't know, get your analog on. Any idiot can count to one. Shades of gray, that's where it's at. So let's see what you can do with analog/op amp circuits. There's tons of opportunities here for, of course, abuse of analog circuitry, but then there's also kind of all of the obvious musical and audio stuff that you could do. I secretly want someone to make some crazy old school analog computers and, see what you can calculate using a bunch of op amps like it's 1960. But I don't know if anyone's going to take me up on that. We've seen people use op amps as motor drivers, risking burning them out. Yeah, well, I just want to see what everybody out there wants to do with kind of my favorite, most obvious analog part. Do you ever make any circuit distortion pedals using op amps?
Not successfully. Some of my noise boxes have them.
Yeah,
have one.
For sure. Like all the good kind of funny filter designs and stuff need them. I hope people come up with neat things here, and if you're into analog design, you will see some stuff you know and love, and if you are not, I'm hoping that this will give some people some inspiration to dip their feet into the warm analog waters. Don't be afraid to enter a project because you think it's too simple. If it can teach somebody something, it's probably a good one to enter in this contest. And of course, don't be afraid to enter it if you think it's too weird, because there is no such thing as too weird.
They take a lot of pictures.
And in other news this week, Maya Posh wrote up a story, news coming out of England. The ST40 spherical tokamak achieves crucial plasma temperatures. Now, the joke is that nuclear fusion has always been 10 years away for the last 50 years, but things are heating up on that front, if you pardon the pun, dramatically in the last 10 years. And, we're getting to the point where things are starting to look like 10 years out may actually be a reasonable timeline instead of an eternal pipe dream. Let's see, a tokamak is a basically donut-shaped fusion reactor where you have the plasma going around kind of the center of the donut. This is a spherical tokamak, which is instead like a sphere it's like an apple with the core cut out of the center. It's a sphere with a hole down the middle, and it kind of circulates around. The advantage of this geometry is that they are able to make it smaller than the full-on donut-shaped ones. And this one just got up to plasma temperature for the first time, and that is a milestone for them. I can't talk fusion plasma without rooting for the home team here, and that would be, for me here in Munich, Wendelstein 7X, which is a experimental fusion reactor. It's about a 30-45 minute drive from my house here. Should that worry me? And it's a particularly neat design. It's a stellarator, which is yet another funny shape. It's kind of like it's like a donut, but the cross section of it is an oval and it twists as it goes around the donut. So it's a warped, twisted donut ring sort of thing. And their big news, they fired it up for the first time, I think 2 years ago. And their big news this year came in the middle of February when they actually ran it with full plasma for 8 minutes. And I think this is getting close. I'm not 100% sure, but that may be the longest time anyone's ever got a hot plasma reactor running for that long. So they're getting huge advancement on that front as well. And they're looking forward to, in the next few years, they're saying they should be up to like running it at half an hour or so. And I've forgotten how many, bazillion megajoules bazillion gigajoules they're talking about if they can run this thing for an hour. But the answer is a lot. That's really interesting. You should check out all of these articles. Maya Posh has actually been writing up tons of fusion stuff for us since way back. And I know I must have written up the Stellarator at least one time, just because I think it's a cool name.
The Stellarator.
Thank you. Exactly.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
And that brings us to What's That Sound? Nice. I was going to do it if you didn't.
What is that sound?
Have a listen. Last week was a Guess the Sound week. I'll tell you it's from a video game. I'll tell you Tom didn't get it.
Okay, here we go. I don't know what that is.
Ah, bummer. Finding a puzzle in the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild game,
Oh, okay.
which either you've played or you haven't. But a ton of our listeners have apparently played it. It's a super good game. My wife got me into it recently, which is why it was on my head. We got 59 answers, and out of those, 54 of them are right. So basically, everybody who plays Zelda Breath of the Wild here has written in and said, that's the puzzle solved sound. So congratulations to everyone. Let's see, 54-sided die. I'm going to go with take a picture of myself, hash it, and then run that hash modulo 54. And the random number is, it's taking the picture, 14, which is 14. And number 14, congratulations to Chips and Solder. Legend of Zelda, Link opening a locked door in a dungeon. Absolutely correct. Good job, Chips and Solder. We'll be getting in touch with you to get you a Hackaday podcast t-shirt soon. My first hack this week is photo plotting PCBs with a 3D printer. And this is kind of an old idea, and I think a lot of you out there who don't make your own printed circuit boards at home would say, bah, just order it from China. Why would you even do this? And I think part of the answer is this is just such an awesome machine that Will Straver has made here that even just making the machine by itself is its own justification. But he also does a super job documenting this thing. It works by taking a piece of copper clad that's treated with a UV resist. You expose parts of it with ultraviolet, and where that is, it kind of cures. And then you can wash away the rest of it, and then you can etch away the copper in the places that aren't exposed. So everywhere that it exposes gets a trace in the end. The trick here is then how you make these traces small enough that you can, actually make a worthwhile printed circuit board out of it. And a lot of people have tried to do this before by taking like a UV laser or something and focusing the spot down. But getting a consistent tiny spot that then doesn't spill over and expose the rest of the board by using a lens, just by focusing it, is actually really hard. So I kind of like the approach that Will takes here, which is to make a dome that contains the ultraviolet lead and then drill a pinhole in it. He then flattens the part of the dome that contacts the printed circuit board so that it can actually sit flat on the printed circuit board itself, so that there's no risk of spillover whatsoever. He makes this whole thing out of aluminum foil, which is, of course, completely non-transparent to UV, but then bakes over it with some epoxy. So it makes it a strong lens pinhole cover thing, but also completely opaque to ultraviolet. There's just a lot of really cool build details in here, and his 3D printed parts are awesome. Last but not least, he actually goes and puts a camera on this thing and then uses a custom jig that he's also 3D printed that has a little crosshair in it to align things so he can tell exactly where the board is relative to this jig. He can realign the essentially 3D printer head to this X in the corner, and that is just a great solution for the registration problem, which is very real if you're doing, say, a double-sided board where you have to flip it over in the meantime. So this little jig he has, plus this optical alignment system, handles that straight away. And I like that a lot. The video is kind of slow paced, but it ends up walking you through like 30 or 40 details that are really interesting to see. And even if you're not into making your own PCBs, you'll probably enjoy it. Yeah, just because it's a neat machine.
Yeah, it is. For my first hack, I chose IBM Selectric typewriters finally get DIY type balls. Y'all probably know that the IBM Selectric was an extremely popular typewriter in the 1960s, and they came out with a 2 and a 3 also, but those are less collector's items than the Selectric ones. Anyway, it's getting harder and harder to find parts for them, so why not print them instead? The type balls, that is. This is exactly what Sam Ettinger has done. And it's a very interesting process to get the characters to print correctly onto the type ball so that they make a clear glyph on the paper. Sam goes through all that on the I.O. project, and it's really nice to look through. Now, of course, a printed type ball won't last as long as metal, but it's still totally awesome, even if it's in Comic Sans. And maybe someday we'll have the technology to print ones in metal. Hopefully there will still be Selectrics around. We can get the rest of the parts for them, but time will tell.
For those of you who don't know, a Selectric typewriter works by having this kind of, well, ball-shaped thing, and it has like 3 or 4 different rows of characters that go all around 4 different circumferences, and the thing tilts to the side and rotates so that it can pick the different letters out. Yeah, they didn't even have Comic Sans the last time a IBM Selectric rolled off the line. So, you can't get custom type for these unless you do this. This is one of those things where I am not a messy goo printer myself. I'm much more of a plastic extrudy noodle type printer. But this is the sort of project that absolutely calls for a resin printer, that resin printing makes possible, and that just looks like it's a perfect fit. So absolutely kudos. Bet you could get this made in metal. I wonder what the resolution of the commercial metal printing services are.
Let's find out.
I mean, now I know what Kristina needs for her birthday. Not Comic Sans, I presume. But
no thanks.
You could do your own handwriting font for an IBM Selectric ball. That would be so rad.
I have to work on my handwriting a little bit.
When I was a kid, my parents had a cursive typewriter.
Nice.
That was pretty awesome. Next up from me is a video from Tech Ingredients, the challenges of producing graphene in quantity. And graphene is one of these wonder materials. It's been, I guess, a wonder material for the last 10 years, and we haven't seen anyone doing much with it. And part of the reason for that is that it's extremely expensive. And the guy who runs Tech Ingredients says that the cost of graphene, if you try to go out and buy it these days, is about $500 a gram. Yikes. Jeez. And that's because there aren't any yet scaled up mass production techniques. And so here he's playing on making these himself, because a lot of the not scaled up procedures are actually really easy. And he goes through a bunch of those in this video. If you want to see, he does the tape one, which is you could take some Scotch tape and put it on a piece of carbon, like a carbon rod. Peel that off, you'll get some graphite on there. If you put another piece of tape on it and peel that off, you can actually, and keep repeating this procedure, you can actually get it down to where you have a single atom thick mesh of graphite/carbon molecules, which is basically all graphene is. Now, if you want to make more than the amount you can get out of this tape method, which is probably micrograms, and you'll lose your sanity pulling tape off of itself, you can compact a lot of carbon together and then heat it up rapidly and cool it down rapidly, and you'll get some graphene out of it. And this is some new research coming out of Rice University. And this video, it's being replicated. And so basically the trick is you compact the carbon together enough so that it gets a low enough resistance, and then you zap it with a big capacitor bank so that it gets hot enough quickly enough. Do all this inside a vacuum to keep it from exploding on you, and you get graphene. The video title has all sorts of things about this being a deadly procedure and so on. And I suppose that's true. It's 300 volts times a whole bunch of millifarads in a big capacitor bank. You know, if you take that across your hands, you'll definitely stop your heart and will certainly die. But I've seen people play with Tesla coils that are more dangerous than this thing. So, you know, definitely respect is called for, but this is not a particularly dangerous process in any real sense of the word. And he ends up making, you know, 0.5 gram or so of graphene out of one shot. Now, the trick is, of course, every time you want to make another 0.5 gram, you have to take the whole thing apart. You have to repack it. You have to test the resistance is right, repack it, put it back in. You know, it takes a lot of time, but it doesn't take a lot of money. And if you're a hobbyist who's willing to throw some time into playing around with this, you've got graphene. And now you're saying to yourself, why the heck do I want graphene? Kind of, it's not super conductive, but it's extremely conductive, more so than any metal you're thinking of. It is extremely strong because it's these single layer sheets of carbon and they really want to stick together. He does a test here, and this was really cool. I'd never seen this before, and it kind of sold me on graphene being the wonder material. He takes some of the graphene that he's made and he mixes it in very small percentages, 0.3% and 0.6%, into some epoxy and makes a bunch of epoxy rods. And then he tests them to see how well they bend. And he gets a 7 times increase in the bending strength by adding 0.6% by weight or something graphene into his epoxy mix, which adds, you know, essentially no weight. It adds like 0.5 gram to this stick that's like 100 gram stick of epoxy. So, you know, it's essentially no more weight added at all. And it increases the bend strength 7 and a bit fold. So totally a wonder material, but horribly, horribly expensive, cost prohibitive. On the other hand, here's a hobbyist friendly way you can make some in small quantities. And he's going to continue working on this problem and see if he can work on some of the continuous processes and make some of them also more hobbyist friendly. I was a graphene doubter before, and now I'm a graphene believer. And here's a pretty cool and not all that bad synthesis method to get graphene in quantities that, you know, are not industrial quantities, but are certainly quantities that would have been impossible using the laser, a piece of Kapton tape method, which makes fantastic tiny amounts of graphene, or the, you know, Scotch tape on carbon, which, you know, again, micrograms. And here he's getting like 0.5 gram out. Pretty awesome. You a graphene believer?
Woo, I am now. If you are, I are.
Yeah. No, you could actually, the videos, again, his videos are always great and they're full of real kind of serious science, and he's not, you know, making it particularly flashy just for YouTube. He's like, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing that, and explaining why. It's really lovely. But by the time he's testing the strain tests on these epoxy rods, he's actually laughing at how much stronger the graphene infused one is as he's doing this test, because he can't believe it either. And so you've got this, like, you know, 30-minute long kind of, let's be honest, a little bit dry video, and then by the end he's just like, you could see he's just totally losing it by how cool it is, and that will make you a graphene believer.
For my next hack, I chose Dyson hairdryer becomes jet engine. Now here we have the finely coiffed Intexa who bought a $500 hairdryer from Dyson. Now I'm going to interject and say that mine was about $20, and I think it's hilarious that it's a Remington since I pointed at my head. But I digress. This hairdryer from Dyson has a impressive build quality, but honestly it will probably melt at the jet engine stage. So Intexa had a new enclosure printed out of metal, and here he takes a little detour for a little look into some of the metal printing processes available at the fab where he had this made. And Al, who wrote this up, approximates that this may have been another about $500 for the enclosure.
Yeah.
But that's okay, because we get to see some fire roasted tomatoes, those poor tomatoes. And yeah, it's successful, and it's It's pretty crazy. So definitely watch the video and see what happens to that poor tomato.
I'm not sure when you replace the outside shell, how much is it really that same hairdryer? But I will also say, is there anything that he won't try to turn into a jet engine? And the answer to that is no, of course. Yeah, not so friendly for your hair when you when the fire comes out the one side.
Well, let's be honest, a regular hairdryer isn't that great for your hair.
We've got this button on ours that turns the heat off. And I
Yeah.
kind of do this, like, especially when my son was young. Like, I didn't want to, like, burn his little kid scalp, right?
Yeah.
And so I was always, like, ghetto PWMing this thing by, like, always pressing this cool button. And so I had this, like, you know, I would kind of approximate turning the heater off about 30% of the time by just pressing this button and then let go, and then press it and then let go. When it occurred to me that I was, like, the manual PWM that... the hairdryer manufacturers were too cheap to include in there. It made me feel a little something. I don't know what.
Oh, mine has a cool setting. Like, you don't have to sit there and hold the button down.
Yeah, ours has a cool setting, but it's not cool enough.
Oh, okay.
Hairdryers, yo. My next hack is actually a product review. Kerry Sharfglass, one of our writers, got his hands on the MNT Pocket Reform, which is a completely open source, and from design up to how they manufacture it, up to it being super easy to reconfigure and add on to, etc. Their previous laptop, the MNT Reform, was kind of the laptop of your hacker nerd dreams, but it was big. This one now is the, quote, pocket version, and it's a really interesting device. Kerry gets hands-on with it and writes it up here. He's also got a tear down, which is basically just pull the lids off and look inside, because this thing is meant to be opened by the end user and worked on. So is it really a teardown if there's just some screws you have to pop off? I don't know. Like, you're invited to tear it down, I guess I should say. It's not a computing powerhouse. It's got wireless. It's designed to be modular, so you could put whatever you want in there. It's got nice mechanical keys. It's got a decent small screen. The frame is made out of milled aluminum, and they just like milled the shape for the computer parts out of it. It's got a trackball. It's a really kind of quirky / personal device that's obviously meant to, you know, fit the needs of the designers at MNT, which is a German company. I think they're based up in Berlin. I actually saw one of these out of the corner of my eye, actually, at Hackaday Berlin, and didn't even realize what I was looking at. And then I come back home, and Kerry's written up his review of it. So how cool is that? Again, all of the designs for this hardware are all completely open, and you can tweak them yourself or see how your stuff fits in. You can 3D print different parts to fit with it if you want. You know, everything's basically premium. The $900 price point, it's a little bit kind of too expensive for what it is, but for what it is hard to say because there isn't anything like this out there. It's, you know, it's a completely free, completely open source hardware laptop, but smaller. It's a little bit chunkier. They call it a pocket computer, and I suppose it is if you've got cargo pants, but it's not going to fit in like your, you know, this isn't like fits in your vest pocket as you go to the ball, or even probably your jeans pocket, but just a little bit bigger than that. You know, it's interesting. Kerry takes a picture of it with a soda can for scale. Anyway, it's a crazy cool device. What is it? It's a palm top, I guess. We haven't seen anything in this form factor since kind of the EEPCs or something. Remember when they used to make funny little clamshell ones? Except this one comes... Yeah, except this one comes with a good keyboard, and it's made out of aluminum. It's solid as a... Yeah, it's a really interesting device. I don't know how many people are out there in this niche that it'll fill, but I have to say, I think it's really awesome that an open source hardware company is taking on manufacturing laptops like this that people can use and hack on themselves and expand. And I think that alone is probably worth supporting if you think that anything like this might be something you'd like to have in your backpack with you.
For my next hack, I chose mechanical GIF animates with the power of magnets. Should I also re-record it and say GIF?
Yes. And we'll play whichever one. No, I don't know. You'll get heckled in the comments either way. So we could run both versions and see which one gets heckled more.
Okay. An A/B test. As Dan says, it doesn't matter how you pronounce it, because this thing is cool. And what it is a cockpit indicator, new old stock, from a 1960s RAF aeroplane that indicated something useful to the pilot, but now it shows a horse, which is super awesome. Because the horse can walk, trot, canter, or gallop, but more on that later. So this cockpit indicator uses a magnetically driven rack and pinion mechanism to show one of three things on the triangular faces. And Mitch, aka Hack Modular, decided on the old horse in motion proto motion picture that was actually made to settle a bet whether all of a horse's legs left the ground when it was running or not. And the answer is yes. But now it's driven by series connected relays, which are slowed down by various capacitors, and these are selectable with a rotary switch, so you can make the horse walk, trot, canter, or gallop, depending on where you put the rotary switch. So yeah, it looks really, really good, and it sounds awesome, all that clicking. And you know me, I love a clear enclosure, but this one's super cool. It looks like a Game Boy that never was, or something. A tiny Game Boy that never was.
Yeah, this is a display that I had no idea existed. I think you described it perfectly. There are these triangular prisms, right? And so it can rotate to any one of the three sides, and you can put kind of whatever you want on them. And this was originally used to make a flashing warning that, I don't know, it looks like it went between stripes and up. Don't think when you're a pilot you want to see that thing going warning up, warning up.
Yeah. I don't want to be the type of pilot who needs to be told when to go up.
I think that's a bad sign when you see this sign flash. But it's an awesome old electromechanical device, and it's really fun to see it. You know, I don't think you're going to find one of these mechanisms yourself, but it also strikes me that this would be an easy enough thing to 3D print. And you could make this mechanism yourself and make a 3D printable. It's like a flip dot display, but with three states, right? And so you could make one of these yourself if you really wanted to. And it might be fun to see.
It'd be neat to do it with little e-ink screens.
So you could actually change the display on each display.
Yeah.
Right. Totally cheating.
Yo, dog.
Yeah, right? Why did he do it with relays in the end? Do we know, or is it just for the extra clickiness?
For probably the clickiness.
Yeah.
I mean...
There's some argument in the comments about whether you could do this with more sides, which I think is interesting. And the answer is not really, because if you try to do it with 4 sides, as you rotate the thing, it gets wider, right? Like if you rotate a square on its side, it gets that hypotenuse that's 1.4 times as wide, right? So you'd have to have a huge gap in between them. And a triangle is actually kind of the best shape you can pull off. I guess if you only had 2 sides, it could flip in place. But a triangle is like that, except you get 3 states for free. My mind immediately went to, you could make these with 8 sides. And I'm like, but you'd see like half of the faces at once. So no, you can't. So triangle it is. Awesome old mechanism.
Don't they have billboards that use this technique? Yes, they do. I've seen them driving around.
Right?
And not driving around.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and if you're making your own one of these, there's no reason to have a small number of these kind of louvers either, because they're all driven by a single rod. You could just, print 8 of them in a row, and you could make a super wide display.
In rod we trust.
My first quick hack is retired welding robot picks up side hustle as a CNC router. This is a video by Brian Brocken about his resurrection of an old ABB industrial robot. And honestly, Who among us doesn't want an industrial robot working in our house? This is basically a story of redoing the motor control and writing his own software for it and all of that. And then he puts a spindle on the end of it and does some light duty styrofoam cutting as an experiment. But it is awesome because it's got 6 degrees of freedom and you can carve kind of arbitrarily intricate shape. But mostly this is just an excuse to play around with an industrial robot. Next up, Water Stanton. Your multimeter might be lying to you. This is kind of a clickbaity headline. Your multimeter isn't lying to you. You just don't understand that AC and DC aren't the same, which is a mean way of saying what happens in this video is he's diagnosing a fault in an antenna and he's using a DC multimeter to test continuity. But that's not the same as continuity in AC, where the alternating current can like jump across things that are like capacitors, that are open circuits in DC, and vice versa. Things that read as continuity in DC might be inductors that then reject the frequency in question in alternating current. So this is your annual reminder that AC isn't DC, and it's a good explanation of how you could be misled by using a normal BP continuity check meter. And last up, from Extreme Electronics, parallel computing on the Pico Cray RP2040 cluster. This is just hilarious. It looks really funny. If you've seen a Cray computer, it's this like multifaceted, the world's most expensive love seat. He's built a little mini one of these out of Raspberry Pi Pico boards and kind of written a custom multi-threading protocol for them. They talk to each other over an I2C backbone, which is really slow. And actually, he's got 8 of them all plugged in together, and it's probably slower than running the code on any one of them individually in the end, because the problems he chooses, like calculating the Mandelbrot set, aren't kind of trivially parallelizable, and the slow I2C bus is biting him in the butt. But that's not the point here. The point here is this thing looks awesome, and it's an awesome experiment. And if you're into parallel processing, it would give you a super cheap playground to experiment with. I don't think there's any practical reason to make this. I think it's just cool. Oh, people in the comments suggest that if you use the Pico's programmable hardware interfaces, you could actually probably make a really fast backbone bus for this. But that's not what happens here. That's left as an exercise for the reader.
For my first quick hack, I chose the sounds emitted by plants are real, but they're still not talking. So this comes from researchers at the University of Tel Aviv, and it came around April Fool's Day, so it kind of fits in. But apparently it's true. Stressed plants will make noise. Anecdotally, I can confirm this. I had a mother-in-law tongue that would make a weird clicking sound when I watered it. I didn't realize that the sound that I was hearing is cavitation in the plant's xylem, which is the tissue that transports water within the plant and delivers nutrients within the plant. That's what I was hearing. So air bubbles are bad, kids. So if you can hear your plants doing this, you should water them more often, even though it sounds cool, and you may want to hear it.
I'm calling the ethics police right now.
Oh. PETP. Next up, we have typewriter mashup becomes 120-year-old teletype. Now, this is a lovely, lovely build, and normally we may not condone such a thing, but this 1930s Remington was fire damaged and seized up, so Daniel Ross added an 80s daisy wheel typewriter to it and turned it into a teletype that can be driven from a 300 baud serial line, and it's very cool. And yes, you should watch the video. Oh, it must have been so difficult. And lastly, we have my glasses hear everything I'm not saying. And this comes from researchers at Cornell who have created a new type of glasses that can watch your lips and mouth move and determine what you said even if you don't voice it at all. And it uses these sonarish sensors in that there are tiny speakers positioned under one of the lenses that point down toward the mouth and tiny microphones under the other lens. and the video explains this very well. If you can imagine a flow going from one side to the other across the mouth, you can see how it would pick up these motions. And the practical uses are some things I hadn't thought of, which is like making your phone advance to the next slide or the next track, a music track, when you don't want anybody to hear you say previous or next. Like maybe you're even giving a presentation and you don't have to push any buttons or say anything out loud or have anybody else do it for you. I just think it's really cool.
All right, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our superb Hackaday writing staff. This time I picked a write-up by Maya Posh of a superb SuperCon 2022 talk. Aidan Cullen is creating an AR system to beat the big boys, and this is a really ambitious project. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but AR-type displays have, if you remember Google Glass, that kind of beat Google down. Apple's been trying to make one of its own, and it's been delayed and delayed and delayed. It looks like they're actually just going to come out with one maybe soon, so I hope it's released by the time I'm saying this, and that's like in your face, Elliot. And, then of course there's like Microsoft's HoloLens, which costs $1 million. What Aidan is trying to do here is to try to make something that is both higher resolution and lighter and basically 2 times to 5 times cheaper than any of the competitors. And he's doing it as, himself. This is an ambitious project, right? It's really neat, though, how far you can get. He picks what he calls an older OLED micro display, but it's still no joke. This comes from Sony. It's a 1280 by 960 display, and it's small enough to fit on your glasses. And, he has to sign all sorts of NDAs to get how you drive it and all of that. He actually says it was a really interesting learning experience to kind of go through all of the steps to be able to work with industrial quality / quantity type devices like this at all. And I bet that's right. So how he's going to make AR glasses that are smaller and lighter and last just as long than his competition is he's moving the compute off of the glasses. And that's not to say that they don't have a little Linux computer in them, but unlike Google and Apple, he's not trying to run, like Google Glass was essentially an Android cell phone strapped to your glasses, right? They had to run the whole Android operating system, which means it has to have a fairly beefy processor, which means it puts out a lot of heat, which means it has to have a big battery on it, et cetera, et cetera. And Aiden's plan here is to put kind of the minimal processor that can still run Linux on the glasses itself and kind of just use it as a remote display. And I think that's really interesting. And he talks about his design aesthetics and how he got to this point. And he has this really great slide where he ends up deciding that his optimum metric is user experience per gram. This is something you have to put on your head, so it can't be super heavy. Otherwise, it'll drive you crazy. And he just wants to get kind of the most mileage out of this he can. But that means all sorts of things like reducing the power, reducing the footprint so that you can make it out of smaller, lighter stuff. It means, redesigning the optics. He goes through the first iteration, which has a lens and stuff, and then the second one has a curved mirror that does both the reflecting and the lensing in one. It's really, really a neat and well-developed project, and again, kind of astounding that this is pulled off by one person. It's also not done yet. It doesn't do everything he wants it to yet. And, he's clearly still working on it. He says throughout that his biggest challenge and kind of opportunity for improvement now is probably on the software side rather than on the hardware side. So it'll be interesting to see how that development goes. But this is all open source, and you could kind of put it together. At least his last version of them, which he's opened up all the files for, you could put it together for around $500 if you can get all the parts in single quantity. So that's kind of cool and actually fairly amazing. Makes it tempting to look into, although I think he's still iterating so quickly on this. I wouldn't buy into one of his early prototypes just yet. But this is definitely a project you'll want to keep an eye on, and a really interesting talk about it that he gave at SuperCon. And again, this is another one of those talks that was held on the smaller stage, so you haven't been able to see it until now. So go check out the video. It's up on Hackaday.
For my can't miss article, I chose Arya Voranova's Share Your Projects, Take Pictures. Now, it may seem on the surface like a, well, duh kind of thing. It's totally not. It's not. Because how many times have you looked back and said, I wish I'd taken more pictures? Every one of us has said that.
Every time.
Every time. So Ari starts out with the adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it definitely is. Especially in this instance of hot wiring a car. And Arya goes through and explains basically that what you're seeing, and really touches on explaining really all the parts of what you're seeing and what you learn from what you see, what you can gather based on what's in the picture, which is really all sorts of things, depending on your familiarity with cars and hot wiring and wires and things like that. So Arya moves on, of course, and talks about taking pictures of PCBs and how lighting is paramount. And of course, many of us have very well-lit workbenches, but could usually benefit from a fill light or a key light, depending on what you got. There's one thing I always wanted to do, and I'm sure many people have done it, but the project that sticks in my mind is Becky Stern's implementation of a still camera mounted, or well, just any camera mounted overhead and wired up to a foot switch. So you can just hands-free take a picture whenever you want. And doesn't that sound amazing?
Part of me says you could do it with a time-lapse camera, and then the other part of me says it's so much better to do it with the foot switch, because you know when you need to take that picture, and it means you won't have to edit through all the wrong ones later on, which is such a horrible chore. So I'm down with it. Yeah, I think this is too big of a topic to handle in one article. And I do think Arya does a great job of kind of, motivating why you need a good picture and, reminding you that you need to be taking good pictures. But there's just like a million different hints that could be added to this. And this article could have been then a million times longer, which nobody would read, right? But I'll give you my super cheap, horrible hack, which is light boxes where the light bounces all around your object make things look hyper professional. And if you go to IKEA and pick up they're these like translucent white Trofast boxes, buckets or whatever, they're like the perfect diffuser. And so if you put your thing in a Trofast bucket and light it from outside, it just makes the world's most awesome even illumination. Getting the lighting right just makes taking a picture so much easier, because you just put the thing in the space with the right lighting and take its picture. Having something integrated into your desk is even better, because then you don't have to move the project over to the lighting setup. You've kind of got it all there and all ready to go. Last but not least, I'll pick one bone with Arya's advice. She says to take these on a white background. And that's cool, but if you're going to do that, know what you're doing, because your camera wants to expose things to be kind of middle gray. And so if you give it white, it's going to completely underexpose the scene, because it's going to like take all of that white background and try to make it gray, which is going to make your project look too dark, and you're going to lose detail in there that you otherwise would have had. So if you're shooting against a white background, pump it up by 2 stops, add more exposure so that the white looks white, because that's going to be the difference between seeing anything in the shadows of your project versus not seeing anything at all. How do you take pictures of your projects?
I like using the wood floor.
Mm-hmm.
Or like one of those blue silicone mats.
Tom always does blue silicone mat. I swear I
Yeah.
can tell a Tom Nardi piece when I see the blue silicone mat. Mike always used to do like a wooden coffee table or something that he would always shoot on. And I'd be like, that actually looks really pretty good. But I do think that there's something to be said for taking the photographs easier. And that's something that I'm not really good at yet. I think on getting them seen easier, Arya points out, there's Twitter or Mastodon or whatever. You can just have it post straight up as soon as you take the picture, and then you're basically good to go. And that's true, of course. That's really great. But in terms of just taking the pictures happen while you're doing it, I think the secret is to minimize the effort there, right?
Doesn't I/O on mobile do a pretty good job of that too? I haven't tried it in a long time.
Yeah,
I always use it on desktop.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't think the bottleneck these days is in our ability to upload pictures to the internet, right? Like, I think that's the easy part. And it's just, did you take the picture at all? And that's where making it as easy as possible is probably a good place to invest some effort. That's about it for the Hackaday podcast this week. Thanks very much for listening. If you have any comments or want to follow along with the links, head on over to the show notes, hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, send us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
3 minutes of crazy crap recorded. But well done, us. Maya Posh wrote a story one more time. And in other news this week, Maya Posh.
Oh, I gotta download it. Still downloading.
No name. I'm gonna go with what's his name.
Integza. Forget I said anything, I guess. I hit the microphone.
Ba-doom, boom.
Do 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 do.